know that it was only $2,700. I don't know if that's a significant amount. I don't. Yeah, I get people's concerns with it, but I wasn't aware it was only $2,700. I thought maybe. But you do get the idea. Like, well, let's just be frank. You know, a lot of people supported Barack Obama. I voted for him in '08.
Yeah.
You know, and then it turns out, you know, he took a lot of Wall Street money, bro, and he didn't lock up bankers, and he didn't break up the banks, and so now you take money from Wall Street, and
I have,
and we don't want a repeat of that. You know, just let's be frank.
So I agree.
So what kind of
two things?
Yeah, please.
So one, I don't take any Wall Street PAC money or lobbyist money, but neither did Barack Obama. I think Barack Obama, when he ran for president, also just took individual contributions, and so I get the concern. First, this may not make me popular. Let me just say, look, I still have a lot of admiration for Barack Obama. I'll tell you where I disagree. But as someone who was Indian American, who never was of Hindu faith, the idea that an African American with a Muslim middle name could become president of the United States, I never thought that was even conceivable. You know, before Barack Obama, frankly, I didn't even think I had a shot at running for political office. I remember interning for Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, who used to be the lieutenant governor of Maryland after law school, and our policy director said, "Ro, well, you know, I know you're interested in politics. Maybe one day you could go aspire to be a staffer. I don't think you could run for office." So what Obama did in providing so much hope and transforming, being the first person of color of an industrialized Western democracy, whose grandfather was a cook in jail with the British in Kenya. My grandfather served in jail in British colonialism. I don't think we can underestimate that, and I don't think we can diminish his opposition to war in Iraq. Now, I disagreed with a lot of his foreign policy. I think he shouldn't have escalated in Afghanistan. I don't think he should have gone into Syria or called for regime change. I don't think he was right to go into a regime change in Ukraine, where when Viktor Yanukovych didn't make the deal with the European Union and made a deal with Putin, we basically encouraged regime change and had someone who came in who was fairly anti-Russian, and that escalated the conflict. And after NATO, we had agreed not to expand beyond Germany. So I disagreed there. I disagreed. I think the drone strikes were excessive and not targeted enough or restricted enough. So there were areas of foreign policy where I strongly disagreed with the president. I also disagreed. I wish he had people like Stephanie Kelton and Robert Reich and instead of some of the people who he surrounded himself with. He could have implemented the Volcker rule. He should have had a bigger stimulus. He should have gone after the bankers. I think that's when his popularity started to decline. But at the end of the day, look, maybe I'm in politics. I get that people aren't perfect. I think he moved the country forward more than backwards. And I respect him for that. But I'm as you said, I'm a different person. I'm more progressive on both economic and foreign policy. And I've come out for things like the financial transaction tax, Medicare for all, my views on foreign policy that I just articulated that are very different than his. And I've gone on record in a way that he hadn't.
You know, when you talk about not being, being anti-establishment or being...
All right, so there are two interesting points on that one. The first one is the Ukraine and NATO. Ukraine and NATO. That's one. The second one is the thing on Obama. I find both of these things interesting. So first, the NATO one. He's right. He's completely right. He's absolutely dead on correct. And I'm slightly shocked that he knows that, even though I don't necessarily know why I'm shocked that he knows that. Let's add more context. So, Ukraine is on the border of Russia. Now, when the Soviet Union went belly up, and it wasn't Ronald Reagan that made Soviet Union go belly up. When the Soviet Union went belly up, the promise was, we're not going to expand NATO. Now, Bill Clinton comes in office and expands NATO further, up to the point where NATO gets expanded almost to the border of Russia. Now, Ukraine is having, if I'm not mistaken, an election. And there was apparently it was like a pro-Russian administration or something, but the West was somewhat against that particular administration. So there started to be riots, there started to be, backlash and all this other stuff. Well, the West picked a pony. European Union, including the United States. Now, you can watch the European Union's debates on this. It's fascinating. I don't necessarily like Nigel Farage. I agree with Nigel Farage when it came to the Ukraine thing. He was absolutely right on that very specific point. On the other stuff, no. On that particular point, yes. We essentially influence the politics of that country, and influencing the politics of that country, we inflamed a civil war. Now, in inflaming a civil war, NATO, its job, National Alliance Treaty Organization, the goal of NATO was to be a bulwark against the Soviet Union and protect all those states in that particular, essentially protect Europe. When the Soviet Union went belly up, why is NATO hanging around? Why was they hanging around? They had no other point of being at that point. But whatever. NATO continues to expand. You have a situation where the West picks a pony in the Ukraine. And picking a pony in Ukraine, that country is embroiled in a civil war. Now, as that country is embroiled into a civil war, Russia starts to also add its own influence into that country, meaning Russia starts adding troops and resources to the Ukraine, to essentially the side of the pro-Russian separatists, as you want to call them. Now, it's important to look at things from other people's perspective, meaning other countries, because you find far more context. And even when the person is icky, even when the country is not necessarily on the up and up, even when the people themselves are just gross, they aren't necessarily somebody you want to sink yourself into, you should still sink yourself into them. You can get context. And that context is sometimes uncomfortable, but at the very least you can understand their motives and what they're doing. Now, you're Russia. You've been invaded multiple times before. Now, in World War I, you were invaded, I think they killed, I want to say several million Russians. In World War II, you lost 20 million people. The country was invaded. Now, you had another situation where Western powers also invaded Russia to try to undo the Bolshevik Revolution. If I'm not mistaken, you had another situation of a German-Russo war. One situation after the next. So you can understand this country being very sensitive about its borders. Like, it's if you lost millions and millions of people after, one invasion after the next, you can understand being somewhat sensitive about it. Now, you're Vladimir Putin. You have a hostile organization that's literally allied to keeping you in check, at least based on their own, political talking points of keeping you in check. Now, action is just taking place where the Ukraine may become also pro-West, which is going to be a pro-West country on your border. What do you do? What do you do? It's sensible as sensible can be. Even though you may call it gross, for him to say, okay, I don't want these guys on my border. I'm going to do what I need to do to create a loft. You may take a portion of the Ukraine, but you're not going to get all of it. Meaning there's going to be an aspect of this where my border is secure, or at the very least I have more space on my border for operations. To put it in context, the United States was willing to get into a nuclear war over Cuba. So put that in context. We're talking about them literally hostile organization being on their border. The United States, Cuba is not on the U.S. border. It's close. It's not on the U.S. border. Now, and the reason why Cuba became this issue, the reason why Castro took those weapons in the first place, because the United States, particularly the CIA, was trying to undermine his government. They were trying to take him out of commission. So yeah, somebody's trying to take you out of commission. What do? You try to find an ally. That ally just so happened to have nuclear weapons. That ally also wanted to have nuclear weapons in striking distance of the United States. It's a win-win. So you're going to put weapons in your country. The United States, from this standpoint, was like, whoa, yeah, we don't want you there. That's a problem. We don't want you on our border. Why don't you want them on the border of the United States? Well, we don't want you on the border because we don't want you in striking distance of us. Okay. So wouldn't Vladimir Putin have the same impetus in that case? Yes. Yes. Now, whether you want to think it's right or not is besides the point. You can understand his motives in regards to doing it. He's right. He's absolutely right. In many respects, the West emboldened the decisions of what took place, or it made it worse. Second component, which I find even more interesting in the sense of politics. The United States doesn't want Ukraine in the in NATO. Don't want them in it at all. I don't care what the United States was saying. I don't care that they were wringing their hands. I don't care. They can say whatever they want. From a political standpoint, they don't want to touch the Ukraine with a 10-foot pole. Because understand, under the rules of NATO, under the agreement, under the treaty, if any of those countries is attacked, even one of those tiny Balkan countries, all of them are attacked. Meaning attack on one is attack on all of them right out. So if you're going to have a situation where Ukraine is already embroiled in a war, they're already in a civil war. It's a civil war that you already know that Russia has people involved in that war. Putin was lying through his teeth. He was it might have been a little green men. Green men, my ass. They were Russian troops. So yes, he had Russian troops in that particular country. If there's any action by the West, you're talking about a nuclear conflict. You're literally talking about a nuclear conflict, a world war. So yes, the United States may wring his hands. The United States may even try to ship him some money, but they're not getting involved. They're not getting involved. So for all the, talking points of everything else about being pro-West, they wanted them pro-West, yes. No, they didn't necessarily want to get involved. They just want a friend at their border. But they're not going to go through that extra step of putting in, they may have a shield of a government in that sense, but they're not going to put resources or anything that would lead this country to a war over the Ukraine. Second point, Obama. Obama's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. So, from a racial context, I get it. I get it. Like, it's difficult to pull yourself out of all entanglements. I put my stake in the ground in a sense of humanity and life. I want freedom for the individual. I want people to be self-actualized. I want people to be free, not constrained by some illusion or hallucinatory concept of cash. So that's where my stake is in the ground. Anything goes against that, I am having problems with. So one thing after another that Obama did in that office is problematic. Whether it's murdering civilians, whether it's giving 95% of the wealth to the top 1%, whether it's attacking the press, whether it's locking up people under the Espionage Act who are whistleblowers. One policy after the next, whether it's passing a right-wing healthcare bill. Like, whether it's asserting the right to murder Americans abroad. Take your choice. Pick your pony. It's up to you. Despite that, though, there's still an aspect of me that gets a tug in this regard. That tug is societal influence. That's exactly what it is, a societal influence. It's, as an African American, I have a particular perspective. As a man, I have a particular perspective. As an American, etc., etc. I understand the difficulty that's associated with an African American becoming president. Now, there are benefits to him being African American, but there were also headwinds associated with him being an African American. And at the very least, there's this admiration in that very specific context of being elected. I just wish it was more to it. I just wish it wasn't, he was the first black president. And then moving on to the next conversation about something else. I just wish it was more full of a legacy in that sense. You have many African Americans who are shilling for the guy, who are leftists under normal circumstances, who are making up this legacy of sorts. They try to make themselves feel better and to have this idea of, oh, we can look up to this guy as being something good. No, he was not good in an office. I'm sorry, he wasn't. He wasn't. You can give him credit, all the credit in the world for being able to get to that level of achievement. You can give him all the credit in the world for being Harvard Law Review. Fair enough. All that stuff is fair. But when you get into the brass tacks of what was accomplished, Khanna says he moved this country forward. He exceeded Bush. He exceeded Bush. The guy who invaded the country and killed 1 million people. That's not all that difficult to pull off. It's like if you were in World War I and you're in the trenches and you're doing these fighting for inches. You get, over the course of 24 hours, you get 2 feet. You've lost 10,000 people, but you've made it 2 feet. Is Khanna going to come out and says, yeah, I think he moved the ball forward? Technically, yes. Technically, yes. But, goddamn, man. Like, so, that doesn't really say anything to say he didn't move the ball forward. And again, he's a politician. So in this case, he's not going to burn his bridges. In regards to the race thing, though, that's a tough one. I mean, it's a tough one. Because you're stuck in the situation. And look, there were aspects of the Obama presidency where race did take a factor, whether he wanted to or not. Throughout the course of his presidency, he downplayed race. Now, part of this was because he felt like he needed to do that. Part of it was because of the opposition he got, purely because of his race. I don't give a shit what Republicans are saying. Some of them were just blatantly racist. They were just blatantly racist. When they're having signs with him as a baboon or stuff like that. How is that a policy? You know, how are you against that particular policy? What about him being a gorilla? It's a policy position. For that matter, if you don't even know that the ACA is the exact same thing as Obamacare, how are you mad at a policy position? This stuff doesn't make sense to me. You're inconsistent and you're rage in a sense. So yes, there was a faction that was purely against it because of its race. Take that to the cake. The Republican Party, yes, used the Tea Party in that sense in order to essentially catch the fastest thing going. So yes, that's also true. So he did have opposition. But that doesn't necessarily explain everything. I mean, many of the policies that he pushed was just ghastly. I'm sorry. They were just ghastly. Now, in the capacity where race poked his head out, they told him, somebody told him early on, you can be a president that just so happens to be black, but you can't be a black president. Meaning, you can downplay race and get into that office, but you can't necessarily have that as your focal point. Like, you can't be a black candidate in that regard. And for the most part, he lived that through his presidency, even in cases where you didn't want him to. So when Louis Gates gets locked up by an asshole of a cop at his door, front door, and Obama comes out and is honest and says, I think those cops acted stupidly. I would have went much further. They were being fucking assholes. They had no goddamn business locking the guy up at his front door. They should have been fired from their jobs for doing something stupid. So yeah, I would have went further. But this was no drama Obama, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, Obama comes out later and says, let's have a beer or something, because he started to get a little pushback. That was Obama saying, I can't be a black president. I can be a president that just so happens to be black. He's downplaying his race. From an entanglement standpoint, in the same way that I'm saying it's difficult to kind of look at his presidency and disassociate race from the presidency, being an African American myself, I'm saying that even him, he wasn't able to do the same thing, at least not to a complete degree. It's like Vulcans and emotions. Like, they peak out sometimes. In that particular case, it peaked out. They acted miserably. They acted miserably. They shouldn't have behaved that way. And then somebody said, hey, by the way, you're a black president. You can't do that. Oh, right. We need to have a beer summit. If a white president said that, if that was Bill Clinton, now granted, Bill Clinton probably wouldn't even brought it up, but if Bill Clinton brought that up, would Bill Clinton have backed away from that? I don't think so. I don't think so. Would Sanders have backed away from it? I don't think so. I make the case that he backed away from it because of race, not because of correctness. He should have stood in that correctness and called it for what it was. In the second component, when he was talking about Trayvon, he was like, if I had a kid, this kid would look like me. For Obama, that is mind-blowing. That is a major statement. The right wing comes out and says, makes hay of it. What are they missing in the statement? Is Obama African-American? Yes. If Obama had a kid, would that kid be black? Yes. Would Trayvon Martin probably look like Obama's offspring? Yes. They're mad at the higher narrative that he's making of, they're murdering us. They need to stop murdering blacks, unarmed blacks. So, yes, he didn't back away from that particular point. It was subtle. It was light. But for Obama, it was significant. So yes, there's these aspects of race that does peek out in the things that he was saying, particularly in regards to what he would consider racial unfairness or injustice. He was consistently putting this thing of trying to tightrope a fence. 13% of the population is African American. You have, white 60-something%. You can't be a black president. You could be a president that just so happens to be black. You're dealing with realities of that sort. So I get what Rokan is saying. But the things that I dislike about him had nothing to do with race. It had to do with policy. I don't like him murdering people. I don't like him putting people in prison for whistleblowers, particularly when they're showing things that we're doing that are absolutely ghastly. I don't like a right-wing healthcare bill. The point of healthcare is healthcare. People are literally going bankrupt trying to make the choice to just pay for medication or pay for a hospital bill. You're putting out a healthcare bill that within 6 years is going up 50%, protecting drug companies in the process. Like, it's one thing after the next. None of these things have anything to do with race. All of these things have to do with policy. So, I understand what Rokan is saying in the sense of, yes, for this guy to be able to make it, it made me feel a particular way of, hey, maybe I can do that too. So yeah, he's right. He's right. But that should not in any way overshadow the failings of that presidency at all. So let's keep going.